Hi guys, welcome back to The Contented Plant. Today we are talking about peace lilies and how to properly care for them. I have had this peace lily for 3.5, 4 years now. And this one is my mom's peace lily. It's a different variety. You can see it's a variegated peace lily, which is very, very pretty. Mine is the largest variety. I'm going to try and do this without knocking everything out of it, but you can see the leaves are quite a bit bigger than the variegated variety. They're also fairly smooth. The variegated, these leaves have a crinkly texture and they're quite a bit smaller in size than the bigger peace lily. This one's about 1.5 feet tall, and it won't get a whole lot taller than that, but it will continue to get bushier as this plant grows and gets healthier. This one has also reached full size. You can see it's about 3 feet tall and it's continuing to get bushier right in here. It's got quite a bit of growth around the base. So peace lilies are often classified as beginner plants. Like I said, I've had mine for 3 or 4 years. This was the very first houseplant that I got, and I did not know anything about houseplants, and honestly this poor thing has been through it with me. The first year I set it over in direct sunlight right in front of my big picture window, and I just burned it to a crisp. I actually thought it was a goner, and then I just threw it back in this corner when we were in the middle of remodeling and I forgot about it. And I came back to it a couple months later and it had revived itself and it was putting out new green leaves, so after all the other leaves got sunburned. So I just clipped the old bad leaves off, and then it's been healthy and happy ever since. I also repotted it into this big old pot that it does have a drainage bottom here, but again, I didn't know anything about houseplants, so what I did was I took it outside. I mixed half potting soil in there and half soil right out of my flower beds, which is definitely a no-no. You don't want to do that. Despite that, it has been a very happy plant. I will switch the soil out probably this year when it gets warmer, because it just doesn't need to be living in those poor conditions anymore. But even with those poor conditions, it has continued to put out blooms every year. It grows bigger and taller. So it is quite a happy plant. So from my experience, I would say it's a beginner plant. It's been through a lot with me and it's still doing fantastic. So for watering, these plants don't need to be watered very often during the winter time. You're gonna water them every 1 week to 2 weeks. I go around 2 weeks, and you're just gonna stick your finger in there, do a soil test. If your finger comes out with no moisture on it, then it's a good idea to give it some water. This one still has a little bit of moisture, so I would let it go a little bit longer. Peace lilies are also very sensitive to chemicals. So if you're in a city and you're using tap water that has a lot of chlorine in it, you're gonna wanna let that water sit for 24 hours because the chlorine and the chemicals will just dissipate out into the air. Otherwise, you can get some burning on your leaves. That's kind of unavoidable anyway. Almost everybody that has a peace lily is gonna wind up with some little brown edges because they're just a little bit picky. That can also happen because of humidity issues. So for light, it really depends on the kind of peace lily you have. If you have a variegated variety like this, it's gonna want a lot more light than the one that just has basic green leaves. You can see this one sits in a area of the house that has a lot of bright, happy light, and you can see that it's putting out these leaves that are almost completely variegated and light. It's really beautiful. It's got a couple that are like half moon variegated leaves. It's just a gorgeous plant, but it does need a lot more light. If you were to just stick it in a dark corner with no light at all, the leaves would start to just have mostly green on them with very little variegation. And that's because the leaves absorb through the darkest part, the sunlight. So the plant, to protect itself, will put out darker green leaves if you put it in a spot that doesn't have a lot of light. Now this guy can pretty much stand next to no light. Really, if you wanted to stick it in a really shady corner with a tiny bit of light, it would survive and do okay. It might not grow quite as fast, and you might not get any blooms from it either. So I have this one in a spot that gets filtered morning light just for like 2 hours a day, and it seems to be pretty happy with that. So the house temperature for these is going to be just fine. Whatever you have your house set at between 60 to 80 degrees, these plants will do just fine. One thing you might want to consider, if your plant starts to have a lot of these brown tips on them, just like this, that's probably because the humidity level isn't quite up to snuff for that plant. And we just went through winter here, so it's been, both these plants have been sitting in a house with the heat blowing all the time, and that's kind of just to be expected. What I've noticed every summer is when I turn the heat off and the humidity kicks up a little bit, then that kind of takes care of itself. So for potting soil, you're probably going to want these plants to have a potting mix that's 60 to 70% potting soil and the rest perlite so they can drain properly. They can handle moisture better than a lot of plants around their roots, but just like any other plant, you can overwater them, and if they hold on to that water, their roots will rot. So obviously they're a little hardier than we give them credit for, because this one has literally been sitting in regular dirt mixed with potting soil and has survived just fine. But I will replant it into a better mix. So to propagate this plant, you can do what's called division propagating. And when you are repotting this plant, you can actually just take what they call part of the crown base here. You can see right over here, there's one that's kind of sticking off to the side. It's right here. And it has little baby leaves coming up. So what I would do is, if I was going to propagate this, I would repot it and gently break this away from the mother plant. And then you can just pot that division directly back into the soil, and it will do really well. You just keep it moist so that it continues to be happy while it's transitioning into a home by itself. You also want to keep the soil mixture similar to the mother plant so it doesn't go through too much shock. So for pests, you do want to make sure that you're continually checking the underside of the leaves. They will hide right under here. This is a great big surface area for them to make their home. So always check under there, especially if you're noticing yellow leaves that are kind of mottled looking or sickly. Check for pests first, and then you want to check your watering schedule if your leaves are yellow with no pests. I think that's it for peace lily care. Let me know if you have any additional tips and tricks down below. These are really great plants for a beginner, or if you have some lower light issues and you have a space in your house that you want to fill with a larger plant. I will see you guys next time at The Contented Plant. Please like and subscribe. Bye-bye.